The officer was petting the dog for the last time, but when he saw the animal's eyes, he realized something terrible and stopped the vet immediately. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain fell in heavy sheets across the parking lot of Evergreen Animal Hospital, drumming against the roof of Officer James Connor's patrol car. He sat motionless behind the wheel, his weathered hands gripping it so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The digital clock on the dashboard read 7:42 p.m. The veterinary clinic would close in 18 minutes. 18 minutes until he had to say goodbye to his partner of 8 years. Maverick, his German Shepherd police dog, lay across the back seat, his breathing labored and his once alert eyes now clouded with pain. The cancer had spread faster than anyone expected. 3 weeks ago, Maverick had been chasing down suspects and finding hidden drugs with the same enthusiasm he'd always shown. Now, he could barely stand without whimpering. "It's time, buddy," James whispered, his voice breaking as he turned to look at his partner. Maverick lifted his head slightly, those loyal brown eyes meeting his. Even now, in terrible pain, the dog was trying to show his strength. James took a deep breath and stepped out into the rain, opening the rear door carefully. With gentle hands, he lifted Maverick, cradling the 70-pound dog against his chest. He'd carried Maverick countless times during training exercises, but never had the dog felt so fragile in his arms. The automatic doors of the clinic slid open, welcoming them into the brightly lit reception area. Despite the late hour, several people sat in the waiting area, most avoiding eye contact with the uniformed officer carrying the clearly ill police dog. They knew what that solemn expression meant. "Officer Connor," the receptionist said softly, standing as he approached. "Dr. Harmon is ready for you. Room 3. James nodded, unable to trust his voice. He'd faced armed suspects, hostage situations, and high-speed chases during his 15 years on the force, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The walk down the hallway seemed to take an eternity, each step bringing him closer to a farewell he wasn't ready to make. Room 3 was dimly lit, with a padded examination table in the center. A man in a white coat stood with his back to the door, arranging items on a metal tray. He turned as James entered, revealing a face James didn't recognize. "Officer Connor, I'm Dr. Wells. Dr. Harmon had a family emergency, so I'll be taking care of Maverick today." The veterinarian was young, maybe early 30s, with dark-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed beard. His smile seemed practiced, not reaching his eyes. James hesitated at the threshold. "Dr. Harmon has been Maverick's vet since he was a puppy. He knows his history." "I've reviewed his file thoroughly," Dr. Wells assured him, gesturing toward the table. "I understand how difficult this is. I'll make sure Maverick is comfortable." Reluctantly, James placed Maverick on the examination table, keeping one hand on the dog's head. Maverick's tail thumped weakly against the padded surface, a ghost of his usual enthusiastic greeting. "I need a moment with him," James said, his voice rough. Dr. Wells nodded. "Of course, I'll step out and prepare everything. Take all the time you need." As the door closed behind the veterinarian, James leaned down until his forehead rested against Maverick's. The dog's warm breath brushed against his face, a sensation he'd felt countless times during their years together, waking up in K9 unit vehicles during long stakeouts, celebrating after successful operations, resting after grueling training sessions. "You're the best partner I could have asked for," he whispered, tears finally breaking free and running down his cheeks. "You saved my life more times than I can count, buddy, not just on the job." He didn't mention the dark days after his divorce, when Maverick's steady presence had been the only thing keeping him grounded. How the dog's need for routine had forced him to get out of bed each morning. How those understanding brown eyes had watched him without judgment during his lowest moments. Maverick whined softly, lifting his muzzle to lick away a tear from James's face. Even now, the dog was trying to comfort him. Outside the examination room, James heard voices. A heated exchange quickly hushed. He straightened, police instincts suddenly alert despite his emotional state. Through the small window in the door, he could see Dr. Wells speaking with a stocky man in scrubs. The man's body language was tense, hands gesturing emphatically, before Dr. Wells firmly directed him away. When the veterinarian returned moments later, his composed demeanor seemed slightly frayed around the edges. "Sorry about that. Just a staff issue." He carried a small tray with 2 syringes. "Are you ready to proceed?" James stared at the syringes, his hand still resting protectively on Maverick's head. Something felt wrong. During his law enforcement career, he'd developed a sixth sense for when details didn't align. Little inconsistencies that most people would overlook. "2 injections?" he asked, remembering his conversation with Dr. Harmon just yesterday. "I thought it was a sedative first, then the final medication." Dr. Wells blinked, a momentary flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossing his face before his professional smile returned. "Yes, that's right. This first one is just a mild sedative to make him comfortable before the second injection." James nodded slowly, his unease growing. Maverick seemed to sense his tension, the dog's ears perking up slightly, his body shifting beneath James's hand. "Dr. Harmon mentioned a consent form," James said, watching the veterinarian carefully. "Oh, right, let me get that for you." Dr. Wells set down the tray and moved to a computer in the corner of the room, his back to James as he typed quickly. James used the moment to study the room. Standard veterinary equipment lined the counters, but a metal case sat partially open on a lower shelf, revealing vials with labels he couldn't read from his position. Not unusual in a veterinary clinic, but combined with the unfamiliar doctor, the heated exchange in the hallway, and his own intuition, it set off warning bells. Maverick's ears were fully alert now, his nose working as he caught a scent that seemed to concern him. The dog's eyes, though clouded with pain, fixed on the metal case with the intensity James recognized from their drug detection work. Dr. Wells turned back with a form on a clipboard. "Here we go. Just need your signature at the bottom." James took the clipboard, glancing down at the standard euthanasia consent form. As he reached for the pen, Maverick let out a low growl, soft but unmistakable. In 8 years, James had never heard his partner growl without cause. "Is something wrong with the medication?" James asked, nodding toward the syringes while keeping his tone conversational. "No, everything's standard procedure," Dr. Wells replied, though his eyes darted briefly to the tray. "He's probably just sensing your distress. Dogs are very empathetic, especially ones with your bond." James nodded, signing the form with deliberate slowness while his mind raced. He had no proof that anything was amiss, just a growing conviction that something wasn't right. If he was wrong, he was simply delaying the inevitable for Maverick. But if he was right... "Actually," James said, handing back the clipboard, "I'd like to speak with the clinic manager before we proceed. Or maybe we can call Dr. Harmon." Dr. Wells's professional facade slipped for just a moment, revealing clear irritation. "Dr. Harmon is unavailable, as I mentioned, and the manager has left for the day. I assure you, Officer Connor, I'm fully qualified to handle this procedure." "I don't doubt your qualifications, Doctor. It's just that this is a difficult decision, and I'm having second thoughts. Maybe we could reschedule for when Dr. Harmon is available?" The veterinarian's expression hardened. "Rescheduling would only prolong your dog's suffering. From his file, it's clear he's in considerable pain. The kindest thing is to proceed now." As if to contradict this statement, Maverick pushed himself up to a sitting position, his attention focused entirely on the metal case. His growl deepened. He seems more alert than he has in days, James observed, making no move to stop Maverick as the dog carefully climbed down from the examination table, legs trembling but holding. "Officer Connor, please put your dog back on the table," Dr. Wells said, his voice taking on an edge of authority. "This behavior is just a temporary surge of adrenaline. It doesn't mean he's improving." James watched as Maverick limped determinedly toward the metal case, his nose working intently. Years of K9 unit work had taught James to trust his partner's instincts. "What's in the case, Doctor?" "Just standard veterinary supplies," Dr. Wells replied too quickly, moving to block Maverick's path. "Nothing relevant to your dog's situation." In that moment, as the veterinarian stepped between Maverick and the case, James made his decision. He reached down and gently guided Maverick back to his side, giving the dog's ear a subtle scratch, their old signal during operations that meant stay alert. "I think we'll be postponing this after all," James said firmly, reaching for Maverick's leash that he'd draped over a nearby chair. "No offense, Doctor, but I'd prefer to speak with Dr. Harmon first." Dr. Wells's face flushed with anger. "That would be extremely unwise. Your dog is suffering needlessly." "He seems pretty interested in that case for a dog in unbearable pain," James countered, clipping the leash to Maverick's collar, almost like he's detecting something. The veterinarian's eyes widened slightly. "Detecting? He's a police dog." "One of the best drug detection canines in the state," James confirmed, watching the man's reaction carefully. "Especially good with opioids." Dr. Wells froze, his hand instinctively moving toward the pocket of his white coat. The movement wasn't lost on James, whose years of police work had taught him to notice such telling gestures. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from tense to dangerous. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding," Dr. Wells said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "I'm just trying to help your dog, that's all." James kept his expression neutral, though adrenaline was now coursing through his system. He'd come here to say goodbye to his partner, not to stumble onto what was increasingly looking like criminal activity. But Maverick was still focused on the metal case, his posture showing the alert stance James recognized from hundreds of successful searches. "I'm sure that's true," James replied calmly, keeping tension out of his voice. He'd talked down enough volatile suspects to know that escalation would only make things worse. "But I think we'll be leaving now. I'll call Dr. Harmon tomorrow." The veterinarian stepped sideways, partially blocking the door. "The clinic is actually closing now. We should finish what we started." His hand remained near his coat pocket. James assessed the situation rapidly. He was unarmed, he'd come straight from his home, not from duty, and Maverick, despite his momentary alertness, was still a sick dog. If Dr. Wells had a weapon, the situation could turn deadly. But James had one advantage: training and experience. "Before we go," James said, changing tactics, "could you explain Maverick's treatment options again?" "Dr. Harmon mentioned some possibilities beyond euthanasia, and I'm wondering if I've been too hasty." The question seemed to catch Dr. Wells off guard. "Treatment options? With metastatic cancer at this stage, there really aren't any. The kindest option is euthanasia." James nodded thoughtfully, using the conversation to maneuver himself closer to the door. He mentioned a new clinical trial, something experimental. Dr. Wells frowned. "I'm not aware of any trials that would help your dog's condition." "That's strange. It was quite specific. A new protocol developed at Eastern State University." Dr. Harmon seemed optimistic. The lie worked exactly as James had hoped. Dr. Wells's confusion was evident. He was caught between maintaining his cover and revealing his lack of knowledge about a non-existent treatment. "I'd have to consult his notes again," the veterinarian said finally. "Perhaps he mentioned it in a section I didn't review." That confirmation that Dr. Wells wasn't familiar with Maverick's case despite claiming to have reviewed his file thoroughly was all James needed. This man was not who he claimed to be, and whatever was happening in this clinic tonight was not standard veterinary practice. James was now positioned between Dr. Wells and Maverick, with a clearer path to the door. Actually, let's just reschedule. I can see the clinic is closing, and this is clearly a complex decision. Dr. Wells's expression hardened. I'm afraid I can't let you leave, Officer Connor. The man's hand emerged from his pocket holding not a gun, as James had feared, but a syringe. In some ways, that was more concerning. A firearm would create noise, draw attention. A syringe suggested Dr. Wells was confident no one would hear or interrupt whatever he planned. This doesn't have to get complicated, Dr. Wells continued, his voice low. Your dog is dying anyway. Let me do my job and you can walk out of here. Nobody gets hurt. James's mind raced. The situation had escalated beyond a suspicious veterinarian to an active threat. He needed to get Maverick out safely, but he also needed to understand what was happening. If this clinic was being used for drug operations, there could be others at risk. What's really going on here? James asked, subtly shifting his weight to a defensive stance. This isn't about my dog, is it? A flicker of calculation crossed Dr. Wells's face. Smart cop. Should have known better than to try this with law enforcement. He glanced at his watch. Look, we're on a schedule here. Your dog detected something he shouldn't have. Now we need to clean this up. We? As if on cue, the door behind James opened. The stocky man in scrubs from earlier entered carrying what looked like a medical bag. His eyes widened when he saw the standoff. What the hell, Wells? I thought you said this was handled. Dr. Wells didn't take his eyes off James. Change of plans. Our friend here got suspicious, and his dog is apparently a drug detection K9. The new arrival swore under his breath. Of all the fucking clinics in the city, you had to bring your dying police dog to this one? James kept his expression neutral, though his mind was cataloging every detail. 2 perpetrators at least, 1 syringe visible, unknown contents in the metal case that had triggered Maverick's training, a schedule suggesting this wasn't an isolated incident. I think there's been a misunderstanding, James said evenly. I came here for a legitimate medical procedure for my partner. Whatever you're involved in has nothing to do with us. Nice try, said the man in scrubs. But we both know that ship has sailed. Your dog made a hit on our product, and you're a cop who's now seen our faces. That's 2 problems we can't afford. Maverick, sensing the danger, had positioned himself against James's leg, still weak but alert. His loyalty, even in his compromised state, gave James a surge of determination. They'd faced dangerous situations together before. This would not be how their partnership ended. So what's your plan? James asked, buying time as he evaluated his options. Kill a police officer in a veterinary clinic? That won't exactly keep your operation under the radar. Dr. Wells tightened his grip on the syringe. You came here to euthanize your dog. Tragically, the stress of the situation caused you to have a heart attack. 2 deaths, both easily explained. You've thought this through, James acknowledged, his tone conversational while his eyes scanned the room for anything he could use as a weapon. But there are a few problems with your plan. Oh? Dr. Wells raised an eyebrow. For one, my captain knows I'm here. Standard procedure when a K9 officer loses their partner. The department will be sending someone to check on me if I don't report in after. That wasn't entirely true. James had told his captain he was taking Maverick in, but no such check-in protocol existed. Still, the bluff might make them reconsider. For another, he continued, I texted my ex-wife when I arrived. She was Maverick's co-handler for years. She's probably in the parking lot by now. That was a complete fabrication, but it sowed enough doubt to make the two men exchange glances. James pressed his advantage. "And finally, you're assuming I came here unarmed and alone. 15 years on the force teaches you never to do either." The stocky man in scrubs shifted nervously. "Wells, this is getting too complicated. We need to just—" Whatever he was about to suggest was interrupted by a commotion from the reception area, the sound of voices, then the distinct sound of the clinic's front door opening. "Hello? Is anyone still here? I've got an emergency with my cat." The female voice carried down the hallway, followed by the sound of footsteps. The unexpected arrival of a legitimate client threw the two men into visible panic. "Get rid of her, Doctor." Wells hissed to his accomplice. "Tell her we're closed. Whatever you do, don't let her come back here." The stocky man nodded and slipped out the door, closing it behind him. James knew this might be his only opportunity. With Dr. Wells momentarily distracted by the newcomer's arrival, James made his move. In one fluid motion, he kicked at the veterinarian's wrist, sending the syringe flying, then followed with a shoulder charge that slammed the man against the wall. Dr. Wells recovered quickly, landing a solid punch to James's ribs that sent pain shooting through his side. But James had momentum and training on his side. He delivered 2 quick blows to the man's midsection, then gripped him by the throat, pressing him firmly against the wall. "Don't move," James growled, applying just enough pressure to make his point without cutting off the man's air. "Maverick, guard." Despite his illness, Maverick responded to the command instantly, positioning himself at James's side, teeth bared in warning. The training that had been instilled over years of partnership overrode the dog's physical weakness, at least temporarily. "You're making a mistake," Dr. Wells gasped, his eyes darting toward the door. "You have no idea what you're getting into." "I'm starting to get a pretty good picture," James replied, reaching with his free hand for his cell phone. "Now we're going to wait right here until I can get some backup." From beyond the door came the sound of raised voices. The unexpected client was apparently not easily dissuaded. James could only hope she wouldn't become another potential victim in whatever operation he'd stumbled into. The raised voices in the reception area grew louder, then abruptly stopped. James kept his grip firm on Dr. Wells's throat while trying to listen for any clue about what was happening outside. The silence was more concerning than the argument had been. "Your friend seems to have handled that situation," James said, careful to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "But my offer still stands. You can explain what's going on here, or you can explain it to a station full of officers later." Dr. Wells's eyes narrowed. "You really don't want to know. Trust me on this." "I think I do," James countered, maintaining pressure on the man's throat. "Starting with what's in that case that got my partner so interested." A hint of resignation crossed Dr. Wells's face. "Fine, check it yourself, but I warned you." James hesitated. He couldn't release Wells and check the case simultaneously, and he didn't trust the man not to try something the moment he let go, but his curiosity about what had triggered Maverick's alert was overwhelming. "Maverick, hold," he commanded, and the dog immediately positioned himself closer to Wells, teeth still bared in warning. It was a compromise, maintaining some control over Wells while investigating the case. James cautiously backed toward the metal case, keeping his eyes on Wells. When he reached it, he crouched slowly, one hand extending behind him to flip the case fully open while maintaining visual contact with the veterinarian. His fingers met cool metal, then the distinctive shape of glass vials. Without looking away from Wells, he extracted one and brought it into his field of vision. The label was partially obscured, but what he could see made his blood run cold. The pharmaceutical markings were legitimate, but a small sticker had been added bearing a code that didn't match any standard medical classification system James recognized. "Fentanyl," James said flatly, the pieces falling into place. "You're running pharmaceuticals through a veterinary clinic." Wells's expression remained neutral. Like I said, you don't want to know. But why risk euthanizing my dog? He wasn't a threat to you. Protocol, Wells replied with a shrug that struck James as chillingly casual. When we have product moving through, we clear the clinic. No exceptions. Your appointment should have been rescheduled like the others, but someone messed up. By the time we realized a cop with a K9 was here, it was too late to reschedule without raising suspicion. The calculated coldness of the explanation made James's stomach turn. So you were going to kill my partner, then me, just to keep your operation running smoothly? Business is business, Wells replied. Nothing personal. Before James could respond, the examination room door burst open. The stocky man in scrubs stood there, breathing heavily, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "We've got problems," he announced, his eyes widening when he saw James holding the vial. She wasn't alone. There's a guy with her. Big guy. Looks like security or something. He knocked me down when I tried to make them leave. Wells swore under his breath. Where are they now? Reception area, looking for a doctor. They said their cat ate something toxic. James processed this new information rapidly. Innocent civilians were now involved, potentially in danger from these men who had already demonstrated they were willing to kill to protect their operation. Looks like your plans are falling apart, James said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The situation was escalating and he was still outnumbered with a sick partner and no backup. Wells exchanged a glance with his accomplice, some unspoken communication passing between them. Change of plans, Wells announced. We're clearing out. Now. What about him? The stocky man asked, nodding toward James. Wells's expression hardened. Like I said, we're clearing out. All of it. The implication was clear. They had no intention of leaving witnesses. James tensed, preparing for whatever might come next. He still held the vial of fentanyl, a poor weapon but better than nothing. Maverick remained at his side, loyally maintaining his guard position despite the visible trembling in his legs. The stocky man reached behind his back and produced a handgun, confirming James's worst fears about how far these men were willing to go. Put it down, James commanded, though he knew the words were hollow without a weapon of his own. You kill a police officer, you'll have the entire department hunting you. Right now, you're just looking at drug charges. The man hesitated, the gun wavering slightly. He's right, came a new voice from the doorway. All eyes turned to see a woman standing there, mid-30s, wearing jeans and a leather jacket, her posture radiating confidence despite the tension in the room. Killing a cop brings heat none of us need. James didn't recognize her, but the way Wells and his accomplice reacted told him she was someone important in whatever operation they were running. Vasquez, Wells said, his tone shifting to something like deference. We have a situation here. I can see that, the woman, Vasquez, replied coolly, surveying the room. Her eyes lingered on Maverick, then the vial in James's hand, before settling on James himself. You brought a K9 officer to our distribution point during an active shipment. That's quite a situation indeed. She stepped fully into the room and James noticed she carried no visible weapon. Either she was unarmed or confident enough not to need her weapon in hand. Neither option was particularly reassuring. Let's all take a breath, she continued, her voice measured. Officer Connor, James supplied, deciding there was no point in hiding his identity. James Connor. Officer Connor, I understand you came here for a legitimate purpose, to say goodbye to your partner. Her eyes moved to Maverick, who was now visibly struggling to maintain his alert posture. I'm sorry about your dog, truly. The sincerity in her voice was so unexpected that James found himself momentarily thrown. Thank you, he replied automatically. So here's where we stand, Vasquez continued. You've stumbled onto something you shouldn't have seen. My colleagues here made some poor decisions in how to handle that, but we still have a problem that needs solving. I'd say we do, James agreed, trying to read her intentions. Was she genuinely looking for a peaceful resolution, or just taking a different approach to the same deadly conclusion Wells had planned? You're a K-9 officer, which means you understand partnerships, loyalty, doing what's necessary to protect what matters, Vasquez said, gesturing toward Maverick. I respect that, so I'm going to offer you a deal. James remained silent, waiting for her to continue. We'll let you walk out of here, you and your partner. You get to say goodbye to him properly, on your own terms. In exchange, you forget what you saw here tonight. You expect me to ignore a drug operation running out of a veterinary clinic? James asked incredulously. Vasquez smiled thinly. By the time you could get a warrant, there will be nothing to find here. The clinic will be clean, Wells and his friend will be gone, and any investigation will lead nowhere. Meanwhile, you'll have lost your last hours with your partner for nothing. Her eyes moved to Maverick, whose strength was visibly fading, his stance less alert now as the brief surge of adrenaline wore off. Look at him, Officer Connor. He's given everything for you. Don't waste the time he has left. The words struck James like a physical blow. He glanced down at Maverick, seeing the truth in Vasquez's assessment. His partner was exhausted, the cancer reasserting its hold now that the immediate danger was passing. How do I know you'll let us leave? James asked, his resolve wavering. Your friends here were ready to kill us both a minute ago. Because unlike them, I understand proportional response, Vasquez replied. Killing a police officer creates far more problems than it solves. It's bad business. The coldly practical answer was somehow more convincing than any promise of mercy would have been. This woman operated on calculated risk, not emotion. Right now, the safer calculation for her was to let him walk away. What about the people who came in? The ones with the cat? James asked, suddenly remembering the innocent civilians potentially caught in this dangerous situation. They'll be fine. A simple misunderstanding about clinic hours, Vasquez assured him. No one else needs to get hurt tonight. James looked down at Maverick again. His partner's eyes were still alert, still watching the people in the room, but his body was failing him. The brief burst of energy from detecting the drugs and responding to the threat was rapidly depleting whatever reserves the dog had left. Time's running out, Officer Connor, Vasquez said softly. For all of us. What's your decision? James looked from Vasquez to Wells to the stocky man with the gun, then down at Maverick. His partner's eyes met his, tired but still trusting, still loyal after all these years. In that moment, James knew what he had to do. All right, he said quietly. We leave, unharmed. I take Maverick home. But I want your word that the civilians out front walk away safely too. Vasquez nodded. You have my word. As I said, unnecessary complications are bad for business. And Dr. Harmon, the real veterinarian, what happens to him? A flicker of annoyance crossed Vasquez's face. Dr. Harmon is fine. He's at home with his family, having received an urgent call about a sick relative that required him to leave town. He'll return in a few days, completely unaware of what his clinic was used for in his absence. James wasn't sure he believed her, but he had limited options. I'll need to see those people out front leaving safely before I go. Fair enough, Vasquez conceded, turning to Wells. Show our guests out, then start clearing everything. We're done here for tonight. Wells nodded stiffly, clearly unhappy with the turn of events but unwilling to challenge Vasquez's authority. He stepped into the hallway, leaving James with Vasquez and the stocky man, who still held his gun, though it was now pointed at the floor. Put that away, Vasquez ordered, and the man reluctantly tucked the weapon back into his waistband. Officer Connor isn't going to cause us any more problems tonight. Are you, officer? Not tonight, James confirmed, the implied future threat hanging in the air between them. Vasquez's smile was cold. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. One night at a time. Through the open door, James could hear Wells speaking to someone in the reception area, his tone apologetic and professional, the perfect imitation of a concerned veterinarian explaining that the clinic was closed, but recommending an emergency animal hospital a few miles away. A minute later, Wells returned. They're gone. Good, Vasquez said. Now, Officer Connor, it's time for you and your partner to leave as well, but first I'll need that vial you're holding. James had almost forgotten he was still clutching the fentanyl vial he'd taken from the case. It was evidence potentially crucial in building a case against whatever operation was running through this clinic. But it was also what had put him and Maverick in danger in the first place. I don't think so, he replied, carefully pocketing the vial. Consider it my insurance policy. Vasquez's eyes hardened. That wasn't part of our agreement. Neither was clearing out your entire operation, but you're doing it anyway, James countered. I keep this. You keep your freedom. For now. Seems like a fair trade. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Vasquez gave a short laugh. You've got nerve, Officer Connor. I respect that. Keep your insurance, but understand this. If you use it against us, our next meeting won't be so civilized. Noted, James replied, bending down to attach Maverick's leash. The dog rose unsteadily, his brief burst of strength nearly depleted. James would need to carry him out. We'll be watching you leave, Vasquez added as James lifted Maverick into his arms. Don't make any stops on your way out. Go straight to your car and drive away. James nodded, holding Maverick close as he moved toward the door. The dog's weight, once so familiar during training exercises, now felt impossibly heavy. Not physically, but emotionally. Each step toward the exit was a step toward whatever time they had left together, away from this unexpected danger. The clinic's reception area was empty, the civilians and their sick cat long gone. The lights were dimmed, giving the space an eerie, abandoned feeling. Through the glass front doors, James could see his patrol car sitting alone in the parking lot, rain still falling steadily around it. Behind him, he could sense Vasquez and her associates watching, making sure he left as agreed. His police training screamed at him to report what he'd discovered, to not let these criminals walk away. But Maverick's labored breathing against his chest reminded him of what was truly important tonight. The automatic doors slid open, releasing him into the cold rain. He moved quickly to his car, sheltering Maverick as best he could from the downpour. After carefully placing his partner in the back seat, James slid behind the wheel and started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Silhouettes moved behind the clinic windows, Vasquez and her people already beginning to dismantle their operation, erasing all evidence of what had transpired. James drove in silence for several minutes, his mind racing. The weight of the fentanyl vial in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing mile. It represented a choice: pursue justice or focus on the precious little time he had left with Maverick. At a red light, he reached back to stroke Maverick's head. The dog whined softly, pressing into his touch. "It's okay, buddy," James whispered. "We're going home." But as the light turned green, James made a decision. Instead of turning toward his house, he continued straight, heading for the highway that would take them to his ex-wife Sarah's home. If anyone would know what to do in this impossible situation, it would be her. As Maverick's former co-handler and a current detective in narcotics, she would understand both the personal and professional stakes. 20 minutes later, James pulled into Sarah's driveway. The modest suburban home was dark except for a light in what he knew to be the living room. He hadn't called ahead. He wasn't sure his phone hadn't been compromised, and this wasn't a conversation for unsecured lines. Before he could reach for his door handle, The front door of the house opened, and Sarah stepped onto the porch. Even after 3 years of divorce, she could still recognize the sound of his car engine. James carefully lifted Maverick from the back seat. The dog was fully awake now, his eyes bright with recognition at the familiar surroundings. "James?" Sarah called, confusion evident in her voice as she stepped into the rain. "What's going on? I thought tonight was—" She stopped short when she saw Maverick in his arms, understanding immediately what his presence at her house meant. "Come inside, quickly." The interior of Sarah's home was warm and familiar, though James hadn't visited in over a year. Photos of their time together in the K-9 unit still hung on the walls, including several of Maverick as a young dog during his training. "Put him on his bed," Sarah directed, pointing to a large dog bed in the corner of the living room, Maverick's old bed, which she had apparently kept all this time. James gently placed Maverick on the bed. The dog circled once, then settled with a contented sigh as if returning to a place he'd never left. "You were supposed to be at Evergreen tonight," Sarah said quietly, her voice a mixture of confusion and concern. "To say goodbye." "That was the plan," James agreed, his voice rough. "Until Maverick alerted to something he shouldn't have seen." Sarah's expression shifted instantly from personal concern to professional focus. "Tell me everything." As concisely as possible, James recounted the events at the clinic, the fake veterinarian, the fentanyl, Vasquez, and her threats. He finished by producing the vial from his pocket and placing it on Sarah's coffee table. "Jesus, James," Sarah breathed, staring at the vial. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into?" "Not exactly," he admitted, "but I'm guessing from your reaction that it's worse than I thought." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, a gesture James recognized from their years together. It meant she was processing something disturbing. "If Vasquez was there personally, this isn't just some small-time distribution operation," she explained. "Elena Vasquez is suspected of running the largest pharmaceutical diversion ring on the East Coast. We've been trying to build a case against her for over 2 years, but she's careful, very careful. And now I've got evidence that could help that case," James said, nodding toward the vial. "Evidence that could get you killed," Sarah corrected sharply. "Vasquez doesn't make idle threats." "I know," James acknowledged, "but I couldn't just walk away. Not completely." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at Maverick, now resting peacefully on his old bed. "No, you couldn't. That's not who you are. That's not who either of you are." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and Maverick's steady breathing. "So what now?" James finally asked. "They'll be watching me. I can't exactly walk into the station with this." Sarah considered for a moment. "No, you can't. But I can take it in, make it part of an ongoing investigation without connecting it directly to tonight." "And Maverick?" James's voice caught on his partner's name. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "He deserves better than to spend his last hours in the middle of a drug investigation. Take him home, James. Be with him. Let me handle this part." The drive back to James's apartment was quieter than the journey to Sarah's had been. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, and Maverick slept peacefully in the back seat, exhausted from the night's events. James's mind, however, was anything but peaceful. Sarah had promised to handle the evidence carefully, to use her position in narcotics to feed the information into an ongoing investigation without explicitly connecting it to him. It was the safest approach, she'd explained, for him, for her, and for the case they could potentially build against Vasquez's operation. "Maverick did what he was trained to do tonight," she'd said as James prepared to leave. "He found the drugs. He protected you. Now it's our turn to finish what he started." There had been a moment standing in her doorway when the years between them seemed to dissolve. the shared concern for Maverick, the familiar rhythm of working a case together. It had momentarily bridged the distance their divorce had created, but that bridge was temporary, built of circumstance rather than reconciliation. As James pulled into his assigned parking space at the apartment complex, he checked his surroundings carefully. No suspicious vehicles, no unfamiliar faces lingering in the shadows. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as he carried Maverick from the car to the building's entrance. His apartment was a modest 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor, 1 bedroom for him, the other converted into a space for Maverick with a large bed, toys, and a wall of photos documenting their years together in the K9 unit. James had often joked that Maverick had the better decorated room of the two. After settling Maverick on his bed, James moved through the apartment methodically, checking windows and locks, drawing blinds, and confirming that his service weapon was readily accessible. The habits of a police officer, heightened by the knowledge that he had made a dangerous enemy. When the apartment was secured to his satisfaction, James returned to Maverick's room and sat on the floor beside the dog's bed. Maverick lifted his head, his eyes finding James's in the dimly lit room. "Some night, huh, buddy?" James said softly, stroking the dog's head. "Not exactly the goodbye I had planned." Maverick shifted closer, resting his chin on James's leg. Despite everything, the cancer, the confrontation at the clinic, the exhaustion, his partner's presence remained a source of comfort, a constant in a world that had tilted on its axis in the span of a few hours. "I don't know if I did the right thing tonight," James confessed, continuing to pet Maverick gently. "Maybe I should have just let it go, focused on you." The dog's ears perked up at his troubled tone. "But then, you're the one who alerted in the first place. Always the better cop between us, right?" Maverick's tail thumped weakly against the bed as if agreeing with the assessment. "We've had a good run, you and me," James continued, his voice catching. 8 years, 87 arrests, 23 drug busts. The statistics were a poor substitute for what Maverick truly meant to him, but they were easier to articulate than the depths of his attachment. "You never gave less than everything, even tonight." The lump in his throat grew impossible to speak around. James sat in silence, his hands still moving rhythmically through Maverick's fur, listening to the steady sound of his partner's breathing. They remained that way for nearly an hour, communication transcending the need for words as it often had during their years together. Eventually, James's phone vibrated with a text message. He tensed, expecting news from Sarah about the evidence. Instead, it was from Captain Reynolds, his supervisor in the K9 unit. "Checking in. How are you and Maverick doing?" The simple message unleashed a flood of emotions James had been holding at bay. Concern from his captain, who knew what tonight was supposed to have been, who had no idea about the danger James and Maverick had faced or the potential threat still looming over them. "Change of plans," James typed back after a moment's consideration. "Bringing Maverick home for now. We'll explain tomorrow." The response came quickly. "Whatever you need. Take the time." James set the phone aside, grateful for the support, but painfully aware of how isolated he felt in his current situation. He couldn't tell Reynolds the truth, not yet, not until Sarah had secured the evidence and determined next steps. For now, he was on his own, with only his dying partner for company. The irony wasn't lost on him. Hours ago, he'd been preparing to say a final goodbye to Maverick. Now that goodbye had been postponed, but at what cost? His partner was still dying. The cancer hadn't disappeared because of their encounter with Vasquez in her operation. They had gained time, but that time now came with danger attached. James must have dozed off at some point because he startled awake to the sound of his phone ringing. The display showed 3:17 a.m. and Sarah's name. "Hello?" he answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. "It's me." Sarah's voice was tight with tension. "We need to talk, not on the phone." Can you meet me at the dog park in an hour? The dog park, their old meeting spot during tough cases, chosen for its open sight lines and minimal surveillance. Is it safe to move Maverick? Bring him, Sarah replied. It's important. The call ended before James could ask for details. He stared at the phone for a moment, then looked at Maverick, who was watching him with curious eyes. Looks like we've got one more early morning call, partner, James said, forcing a lightness into his voice that he didn't feel. Think you're up for it? Maverick responded by standing, a bit unsteady but determined. The sight both warmed and broke James's heart. Even now, his partner was ready to answer the call. The dog park was deserted at 4:15 a.m. as James had expected. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a clean, crisp pre-dawn air. He parked in his usual spot, then helped Maverick out of the car. The dog moved slowly, but seemed to enjoy the familiar location, his nose working to catalog the scents left by other canine visitors hours earlier. Sarah's unmarked police car pulled in a few minutes later. She emerged looking like she hadn't slept, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her expression grim. Thanks for coming, she said, bending to greet Maverick with a gentle pat. How's he doing? Better than expected after everything, James replied. What's going on, Sarah? Why the cloak and dagger at 4 in the morning? She straightened, glancing around the empty park before speaking. The vial you gave me, it's not just fentanyl. The lab ran a preliminary analysis. It's something new, a modified compound that's significantly more potent, and the manufacturing markers suggest it's being produced locally, not imported. Meaning Vasquez isn't just distributing, she's producing, James concluded. Exactly. This could be the break we've been looking for in the investigation. But it also means the stakes are much higher than we thought. James absorbed this information, his concern deepening. So what's the plan? Sarah hesitated, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was the vial James had taken from the clinic. This is a replica. The lab created it for me. The real one is logged into evidence under a different case number. Why are you giving me this? Because Vasquez is going to want it back, Sarah explained. And when she comes for it, we need to be ready. James stared at her incredulously. You want to use me as bait? With Maverick in his condition? No, Sarah shook her head firmly. I want to arrange a controlled handover, on our terms, with backup in place. This is our chance to catch Vasquez in the act, something we've never been able to do before. And if I refuse? If I just lay low until this blows over? Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. James, you know it doesn't work that way. Vasquez saw your face. She knows who you are, where you work. She probably knows where you live by now. This isn't going to blow over. She was right, and James knew it. He'd made himself a target the moment he pocketed that vial, perhaps even before that, when Maverick first alerted to the drugs. So what exactly are you proposing? He asked, watching as Maverick sniffed around a nearby bench, temporarily distracted from their tense conversation. A trade, Sarah replied. We let it be known through certain channels that you're willing to return the vial in exchange for assurances of safety. We set up the exchange, secure the area with undercover officers, and when Vasquez or one of her people shows up, we make the arrest. And you think she'll fall for that? I think she'll be cautious but interested. That vial is worth a lot to her, not just financially, but as potential evidence. She'll want it back. James considered the proposal, his eyes never leaving Maverick. His partner deserved peace in his final days, not to be caught in the crossfire of a drug sting. But there might not be any peace for either of them as long as Vasquez remained a threat. I need to think about it, he finally said. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course, but we don't have much time. If Vasquez follows her usual pattern, She'll have cleared out the clinic completely by now and be looking to tie up loose ends. That includes you. Dawn was breaking as James and Maverick returned to their apartment. The streets were quiet, the city still mostly asleep, giving James space to think about Sarah's proposal. The replica vial sat heavily in his pocket, a small object with enormous implications. Inside the apartment, James went through his security checks again before settling Maverick with fresh water and a comfortable blanket. The dog seemed content for now, his condition stable if not improved. The events at the clinic had triggered a temporary surge of his old strength and training, but the underlying reality remained unchanged. Maverick was dying. This stark truth weighed on James as he considered Sarah's plan. A controlled handover made tactical sense, offering the best chance to neutralize the threat Vasquez posed, while potentially advancing a significant drug investigation. But it also meant using his final days with Maverick as part of an operation, something he'd promised himself he wouldn't do after making the difficult decision to retire his partner. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Captain Reynolds. "Connor," he answered, trying to sound normal. "James," Reynolds replied, his normally gruff voice softened with concern. "Just checking in. You said there was a change of plans last night?" James hesitated. He couldn't tell his captain the whole truth, not without consulting Sarah and potentially compromising the investigation, but he couldn't lie completely either. "Yes, sir, I couldn't go through with it. Not last night." A pause on the other end. "I understand. These decisions aren't easy. Take whatever time you need. Your leave is approved for the rest of the week." "Thank you, sir." "And James? When it's time, if you want someone there with you and Maverick, just say the word. You don't have to handle this alone." The kindness in his captain's voice nearly undid James. "I appreciate that, sir." After ending the call, James sat beside Maverick, who had settled into a light sleep. His partner had been more than a working dog. He'd been James's constant companion through the darkest period of his life. The divorce, the depression that followed, the slow rebuilding of his sense of purpose. Maverick had been there for all of it, a steady presence that asked nothing but gave everything. Could he risk that precious remaining time on an operation, even one that might ensure their safety? The decision crystallized slowly as James watched Maverick sleep. His partner had never hesitated when duty called. Even last night, sick as he was, Maverick had responded to the presence of drugs and potential danger exactly as he'd been trained to do. That dedication had likely saved James's life. He owed Maverick the same commitment, to finish what they'd started together, to ensure that the danger they'd uncovered was addressed, not just for their own safety, but because it was the right thing to do. James reached for his phone and called Sarah. "I'm in," he said when she answered, "but I have conditions." "Name them," Sarah replied without hesitation. "Maverick stays out of it, completely. Whatever setup you arrange, he's not there." "Agreed. What else?" "I want a protective detail on my apartment while this is happening. Someone with experience with sick dogs who can stay with Maverick." "Done. Officer Martinez from the K9 unit is on medical leave right now, shoulder injury. I'm sure she'd be willing to help." James nodded, though Sarah couldn't see it. Martinez was a good choice, experienced with police dogs and someone Maverick knew and trusted. "One more thing," he added. "After this is over, regardless of the outcome, I want your word that I'll have uninterrupted time with Maverick. No debriefings, no statements, nothing until it's done." Sarah's voice softened. "You have my word, James. We'll make sure of it." The details came together rapidly after that. Sarah had connections throughout the department and the authority to move resources without raising too many questions. By midday, a plan was in place. The handover would occur that evening, at an abandoned factory on the edge of the industrial district, a location that offered multiple access points for police personnel, while appearing isolated enough to satisfy Vasquez's caution. Word would be spread through a confidential informant that James was willing to return the vial for assurances of safety. The exchange point would be covered by undercover officers with tactical teams positioned for intervention if necessary. Officer Martinez arrived at James's apartment late in the afternoon, a small duffel bag slung over her good shoulder. "Thanks for doing this, Lisa," James said as he let her in. "No thanks needed," she replied, her eyes immediately finding Maverick, who had raised his head at her arrival. "Hey there, old friend." She crossed to the dog's bed and knelt beside him, her movements gentle as she assessed his condition with experienced eyes. "I brought his favorite treats, and mine." She patted the duffel bag with a small smile. "You're staying the night?" "That's the plan. Sarah thought it would be best to maintain the protection until we're sure everything's resolved." James nodded, grateful for the thoroughness of the arrangements. "Maverick's medication is on the kitchen counter. He gets the pain meds every 6 hours and the anti-inflammatory with dinner." "Got it." Martinez settled beside Maverick, who had already relaxed at her familiar presence. "We'll be fine, James. You focus on getting this done so you can come back to him." As James prepared to leave, gathering his service weapon and checking the replica vial one last time, he found himself hesitating at the door to Maverick's room. His partner was resting comfortably, seemingly content under Martinez's watchful eye. Still, the thought that this might be the last time he saw Maverick alive was unbearable. "I'll be back, buddy," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "You just rest easy." Maverick's eyes opened at the sound of his voice, a quiet understanding passing between them that transcended words. Then, with a soft exhale, the dog closed his eyes again, trusting James to return as he always had. The drive to the industrial district was tense, the silence in the car a stark contrast to the years James had spent with Maverick riding beside him or in the specially designed K9 compartment. The absence felt like a physical thing, a weight pressing against his chest. Sarah was waiting at the predetermined meeting point, her unmarked car parked discreetly behind an abandoned shipping container. She stepped out as James approached, her expression professional, but with an underlying concern that spoke to their history together. "Everything set?" James asked, scanning the area automatically for potential threats. "Yes. We have officers in position here, here, and here," she replied, pointing to various vantage points around the factory. "Tactical is 2 minutes out if needed. The CI made contact an hour ago and we received confirmation that someone from Vasquez's organization will be here at 7. James checked his watch, 6:42 p.m. "Do we know who they're sending?" "Not Vasquez herself, according to our intel. Probably Wells or another lieutenant." "And if it goes south?" Sarah's eyes met his, her determination clear. "It won't. But if it does, we're prepared." They moved into position, taking cover behind a rusted piece of machinery that offered a clear view of the designated exchange point. As they waited, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the concrete expanse of the factory floor. "He'll be okay, you know," Sarah said quietly after several minutes of silence. "Martinez is good. She'll take care of him." James nodded, his throat tight. "I know, it's just, you should be with him, not here." "I need to be here," James corrected. "For both of us. Maverick did his job last night. Now I need to do mine." Sarah's hand found his arm, a brief squeeze of understanding. "You're a good team. Always were." Before James could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the quiet. Headlights swept across the factory entrance, then went dark as the engine shut off. "Showtime," Sarah murmured, her hand moving to her concealed weapon. James took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the confrontation to come. The replica vial seemed to burn in his pocket, a reminder of everything at stake. For Maverick, for the investigation, for his own future, he needed this to go right. "Let's finish this," he said, straightening from their cover and stepping into the designated exchange area, alone and apparently vulnerable, exactly as planned. The figure that emerged from the vehicle wasn't Wells, as James had expected, but the stocky man who had been his accomplice at the clinic. He was dressed differently now, dark jeans and a leather jacket instead of medical scrubs, but his build and the wary way he scanned the surroundings were unmistakable. In the fading light, James could see the mark on his forehead where he'd been injured during the confrontation at the clinic. "That's the second guy from last night," James whispered to Sarah, who remained hidden behind the machinery. "Not Wells." "Stick to the plan," she replied softly. "We've got you covered." The man approached cautiously, stopping about 20 feet from James. His hand rested near his waistband, likely on a concealed weapon, James thought. "Officer Connor," the man called, his voice echoing slightly in the empty factory. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I'm not here for conversation," James replied, keeping his tone neutral. "I have something you want. I want something in return." The man's lips curled in a humorless smile. "And what might that be?" "Assurance that my partner and I are left alone, permanently." "Your dog?" The man raised an eyebrow. "From what I understand, he doesn't have much time left anyway." The casual cruelty of the remark made James's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composure. "That's not your concern. Do we have a deal or not?" The man seemed to consider for a moment, his eyes never leaving James's face. "Show me what you've got first." James reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew the replica vial, holding it up where the man could see it clearly in the dim light. "This is what almost got me and my partner killed last night. Worth enough to you and Vasquez to make a simple promise?" At the mention of Vasquez's name, the man's expression hardened. "Careful, officer. Names have power." "So do synthetic opioids," James countered, "especially new experimental ones being manufactured locally." That got a reaction, a flicker of surprise quickly masked. "You've been busy." "I'm a cop. It's what I do." The man took a step forward, then stopped as James subtly shifted his stance to a more defensive position. "Here's how this works," the man said. "You give me the vial. I give you my word that you and your dog are off our radar. Clean break. Everyone walks away." "Your word doesn't mean much to me," James replied. "I want to hear it from Vasquez." The man shook his head. "Not possible. She doesn't meet with cops." "Then we don't have a deal." James made as if to pocket the vial again. "Wait," the man said quickly, his hand twitching near his waistband. "Maybe there's a compromise. I can put her on the phone. You can hear it directly from her." James pretended to consider this, knowing that every second of conversation gave the tactical team more time to get into optimal positions. "All right, call her." The man pulled out a cell phone with his left hand, his right still hovering near his concealed weapon. He dialed and put the call on speaker. "Yes?" A woman's voice, Vasquez unmistakably. "I'm with the cop. He wants assurances from you directly that he and his dog will be left alone if he returns our property." A pause, then, "Officer Connor, can you hear me?" "I'm here," James confirmed, watching the man carefully while listening for any clues in Vasquez's voice about her location or intentions. "You've caused quite a disruption to my operation. Most people who do that don't get the opportunity to negotiate." "I'm not most people," James replied evenly. "And this isn't a negotiation. It's a simple exchange, the vial for your word that my partner and I are left alone." Another pause, longer this time. "You have my word?" Return what belongs to me and our business is concluded. James looked at the man holding the phone. And your people will honor that? The man nodded. If she says it's done, it's done. Then we have a deal. James stepped forward, the vial extended in his open palm. The man approached cautiously, reaching for the vial. As their hands met in the exchange, multiple things happened at once. A second vehicle, one that neither James nor the tactical team had registered approaching, burst through the far entrance of the factory, its headlights suddenly blazing. At the same moment, the man's hand closed not just around the vial, but around James's wrist, yanking him forward while his other hand drew a weapon. "Gun!" Sarah shouted from her position, and the carefully orchestrated operation dissolved into chaos. James reacted on instinct, using the man's own momentum against him. He twisted sharply, breaking the grip on his wrist while simultaneously striking at the armed hand. The gun clattered to the concrete floor as undercover officers emerged from their hiding places, weapons drawn. The second vehicle screeched to a halt, its doors flying open. Two figures emerged, both armed, creating a standoff between them and the police officers now converging on the scene. "Police, drop your weapons!" Sarah's voice rang out as she moved to James's side, her service weapon aimed at the new arrivals. For a tense moment, no one moved. James, now on one knee after the struggle with the first man, assessed the situation rapidly. The man he'd been negotiating with was on the ground a few feet away, his weapon out of reach but his eyes burning with hatred. The two newcomers remained beside their vehicle, guns still raised but not firing, weighing their options. Then a third figure stepped out of the vehicle, Vasquez herself, unarmed but radiating authority. "Stand down," she commanded, and to James's surprise, her people immediately lowered their weapons. Sarah kept her gun trained on Vasquez. "Elena Vasquez, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, assault on a police officer, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." Vasquez smiled thinly. "I don't think so, Detective. This is entrapment, pure and simple. You arranged this entire scenario to lure me here." "We arranged nothing," Sarah replied. "Officer Connor was at your distribution point last night by coincidence. Your people tried to kill him and his canine partner. Everything that followed was your doing, not ours." As the tactical team moved in to secure the armed men, Vasquez remained remarkably calm. "You have no evidence connecting me to any distribution point or to any threats against Officer Connor." "Actually," James said, rising to his feet, "we do." He reached into his pocket and produced his phone. "I've been recording this entire conversation, including the part where you acknowledge the vial belongs to you and where you implicitly confirmed that your people threatened me and my partner last night." A flash of genuine surprise crossed Vasquez's face, the first crack in her composed exterior. "That recording won't be admissible. You didn't identify yourself as law enforcement conducting an investigation." "I didn't need to," James countered. "I was the victim of a crime, recording a conversation with my alleged assailants, perfectly legal in this state." Sarah stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "And that's just the beginning. We have the vial from last night, the real one, not the replica your man just tried to take by force. We have your voice on record, and by morning we'll have search warrants for every property associated with you and your organization." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Vasquez's eyes. She glanced at the factory exits now blocked by tactical officers, then at her subdued associates. The calculation was clear on her face. She was mapping escape routes and finding none. "You're making a mistake," she said finally, her voice cold. "I have connections you can't imagine. This won't stick." "Maybe not," Sarah acknowledged as she secured the handcuffs around Vasquez's wrists. "But it will disrupt your operation significantly, and the investigation won't stop here." As the tactical team led Vasquez and her associates away, James felt a curious mixture of relief and anticlimax. The threat had been neutralized more easily than he'd anticipated, though the attempted double-cross suggested Vasquez had never intended to honor her word. If not for the tactical team's presence, James might well have been killed, the vial taken, and his body left in the abandoned factory. "You okay?" Sarah asked, holstering her weapon as she approached him. "Yeah," James replied, though his wrist ached where the man had grabbed him. "Just ready to get back to Maverick." Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The arrest team will take them for processing. I'll need your statement, but it can wait until tomorrow." "Thanks." James glanced at his phone, which still showed the active recording. "Think it'll be enough, what she said? Combined with the vial and what we find when we search her properties, it's a start." Sarah squeezed his shoulder gently. "You did good work tonight, James. Maverick would be proud." The mention of his partner brought an immediate urgency to return home. "I should go." "Go," Sarah agreed. "I'll handle things here. Give Maverick a pat from me." As James drove away from the factory, leaving behind the flashing lights of police vehicles and the controlled chaos of a major arrest, his thoughts turned entirely to his partner. The operation had gone better than expected. Vasquez was in custody, her immediate threat neutralized. But that success did nothing to change Maverick's condition or the decision that still awaited them. The apartment building came into view, and James felt a strange reluctance to park, to go upstairs, to face what came next. For a few hours, the urgency of the operation had pushed aside the reality of Maverick's illness. Now, with the immediate danger past, that reality rushed back with crushing force. Officer Martinez opened the door before James could even knock, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "How did it go?" she asked quietly, stepping aside to let him in. "We got her," James replied, his voice equally low. "Vasquez is in custody. How's Maverick?" Martinez's face softened. "He's been restless the last hour or so. I think he knows something's happening. He kept watching the door." James felt a pang of guilt at having left Maverick during what might be their final hours together. He moved quickly to his partner's room, pausing in the doorway as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. Maverick was awake, his head raised from his bed, ears perked forward in that alert posture James knew so well. When he saw James, his tail began to thump against the cushion, not with the vigorous energy of his healthy days, but with unmistakable recognition and joy. "Hey, buddy," James said, his voice catching as he crossed the room and knelt beside the dog's bed. "I told you I'd be back." Maverick struggled to rise, eager to greet him properly despite his weakness. James gently eased him back down. "It's okay. You stay comfortable." The dog settled, but his eyes remained fixed on James, as if making sure he wouldn't disappear again. James began to stroke Maverick's head, finding comfort in the familiar texture of his fur, the warmth of his body. "He ate a little around 7, Martinez reported from the doorway, and took his medications without any trouble. His breathing seemed a bit labored earlier, but it's better now." James nodded, grateful for her detailed observations. "Thank you, Lisa, for everything." "Of course." She hesitated, then added, "I can stay longer if you want, or I can go, give you two some privacy." "You should get some rest," James said. "I've got it from here." Martinez gathered her things quietly, pausing before she left to place a gentle hand on Maverick's side. "You're a good boy," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "The best of us." After she'd gone, James settled on the floor beside Maverick's bed, his back against the wall, one hand resting on his partner's flank. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of Maverick's breathing and the distant hum of traffic outside. "We did it, boy," James said softly. "Vasquez is in custody. Her operation is shut down, at least for now. You made the alert that started it all." Maverick shifted slightly, pressing closer to James's hand, his dark eyes reflecting the faint light from the hallway. "I keep thinking about last night," James continued, finding comfort in talking to his partner as he'd done countless times over the years. "How different things might have been if we'd seen another vet. If I'd taken you in earlier or later. All these little coincidences that led us to that clinic at that exact moment." He paused, considering the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. Maybe it wasn't coincidence. Maybe it was you, doing what you've always done, finding the bad guys, even when that wasn't the mission. Maverick's tail thumped once in seeming agreement, and James smiled despite the ache in his chest. "You never were one to let cancer get in the way of a good drug bust, were you?" The night deepened around them as James continued to talk, recounting favorite memories from their years together. The time Maverick had tracked a missing child through 3 miles of dense forest. The drug bust where he'd found a hidden compartment that had eluded the human officers for hours. The day they'd received a commendation from the mayor, and Maverick had been more interested in the treats in James's pocket than the ceremony. "Remember that hostage situation at the bank?" James asked, his hand moving rhythmically through Maverick's fur. "When the negotiator couldn't make headway and they sent us in through the back? You were so quiet, so focused. And when we got to that back office and found those 2 terrified tellers hidden under the desk, the way they looked at you, like you were some kind of miracle." Maverick's eyes never left James's face, attentive as always to his partner's voice. "You were a miracle to a lot of people, buddy, including me." As the night wore on, James noticed subtle changes in Maverick's condition. His breathing became slightly more labored, the pauses between breaths occasionally longer than normal. His eyes, though still alert when James spoke directly to him, would drift closed for longer periods. The cancer was asserting itself again, the brief rally triggered by the events at the clinic now fading. James had seen enough deaths, both human and canine, during his career to recognize the signs. Around 3 in the morning, Maverick grew restless, whining softly and trying to change positions despite his weakness. James helped him, supporting his weight as he turned, then settled back onto the cushioned bed. "Pain getting worse?" James asked softly, reaching for the medication Martinez had left on the nearby table. "Let's fix that." He administered the pain reliever as he'd been shown, gently massaging Maverick's throat to ensure he swallowed the pill hidden in a small treat. Within 20 minutes, the dog's discomfort seemed to ease, his breathing becoming more regular, though still shallow. James's phone vibrated with a text message from Sarah. "Final count. Vasquez, Wells, and 3 associates in custody. Search warrants being executed at multiple locations. You did good work tonight. How's Maverick?" He typed back a brief response. "Hanging in there. Thanks for everything." The reply came quickly. "Call if you need anything. Anytime." James set the phone aside, returning his full attention to Maverick, who had drifted into a light sleep. In the quiet darkness of the room, the reality he'd been avoiding since the diagnosis now settled over him like a physical weight. It was time. Not tonight. Maverick was stable for now, comfortable with the medication. But tomorrow, or the next day at the latest. The reprieve they'd been granted by the unexpected events at the clinic was coming to an end. The cancer was winning as they'd always known it would. James leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes burning with unshed tears. The thought of making that final drive to the vet's office, a different one this time with a vet he trusted, was almost unbearable. But so was the thought of waiting too long, of letting Maverick suffer because he couldn't bring himself to say goodbye. "I promised I'd never let you suffer," he whispered to his sleeping partner, "and I won't break that promise no matter how much it hurts." Dawn was breaking when James's phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet room. Maverick stirred but didn't fully wake as James quickly answered to stop the ringing. Connor, he said softly, moving into the hallway to avoid disturbing his partner. James, it's Sarah. Her voice had an urgency that immediately put him on alert. Something's happened. We found something during the search of Wells's residence that you need to see. Can it wait? James asked, glancing back at Maverick's room. I'm not leaving him right now. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, Sarah replied. It's about Maverick, about his cancer. James felt a chill run through him. What about it? I can't explain over the phone. Can I come to you? I can be there in 20 minutes. He hesitated, reluctant to have visitors during what might be his final hours with Maverick. But Sarah's tone conveyed a significance he couldn't ignore. All right, he agreed finally. But just you, and keep it brief. Understood. I'm on my way. After ending the call, James returned to Maverick's side, finding him awake and watching the doorway expectantly. We've got a visitor coming, buddy, he explained, settling back beside the bed. Sarah, remember her? Your other handler, before she moved to narcotics. Maverick's tail moved slightly at the name, recognition in his eyes. Despite their divorce, Sarah had remained part of Maverick's life whenever possible, stopping by the K9 training center to see him, bringing treats when their paths crossed at the station. As promised, Sarah arrived 20 minutes later. James let her in, noting immediately the file folder she carried and the strange mix of anger and hope in her expression. What's going on? He asked as he led her to Maverick's room. You need to see this first, she replied, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Then we'll talk. She knelt beside Maverick, taking a moment to greet him gently before turning to James with the folder extended. We found this in a hidden safe in Wells's home office. It's a medical file, Maverick's medical file. James took the folder with a growing sense of dread. What are you talking about? Maverick's medical records are with Dr. Harmon. Look at it, James. He opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. They appeared to be standard veterinary records, blood work results, treatment notes, medication prescriptions, all bearing Maverick's name and official K9 unit identification number. But the dates were wrong, more recent than Maverick's last official vet visit, and the doctor's name at the bottom of each page wasn't Harmon, but Wells. I don't understand, James said, looking up at Sarah in confusion. How does Wells have medical records for Maverick? Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes moving from James to Maverick and back again. We think Wells has been treating Maverick for months, without your knowledge. James stared at her, struggling to make sense of her words. That's impossible. Maverick sees Dr. Harmon. He's never been treated by Wells before last night. Look at the third page, Sarah directed, her voice gentle but insistent. James turned to the indicated page and felt the blood drain from his face. It was a detailed treatment plan, spanning the past 4 months, with medications, dosages, and administration schedules. Some of the medication names he recognized from Dr. Harmon's recent prescriptions for Maverick's cancer. Others were unfamiliar. I don't understand, he repeated, his mind refusing to process the implications. How could Wells have been treating Maverick without my knowledge? Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping to ensure only James could hear her. We found more than just records, James. We found vials of medication labeled with Maverick's name and ID number, and notes, detailed notes about symptom progression and drug interactions. James looked at Maverick, who was watching them both with tired but attentive eyes. Are you saying... He couldn't finish the thought, the possibility too overwhelming to articulate. We've sent the medications to the lab for rush analysis, Sarah continued. But based on Wells's notes, it appears he's been administering a combination of drugs designed to mimic the symptoms of aggressive cancer. The room seemed to tilt around James as the full impact of Sarah's words hit him. You're saying Maverick doesn't have cancer? That this has all been some kind of poisoning? We can't be certain until we get the lab results and have him properly examined by a trusted vet. But yes, that's what the evidence suggests. James's hand moved instinctively to Maverick's head, as if to protect him from a threat that had already infiltrated his body. Why? Why would Wells do this? We're still piecing that together, Sarah replied, her expression grim. But based on what we've found in the searches so far, it appears Vasquez's operation wasn't just distributing existing pharmaceuticals. They were developing and testing new synthetic compounds. Using Maverick as a test subject? James asked, horror and rage building in equal measure. How? When would they have had access to him? Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Do you remember about 4 months ago, when Maverick cut his paw during that search in the abandoned warehouse? James nodded slowly. The memory was clear. Maverick had stepped on broken glass during a drug search, requiring several stitches. Dr. Harmon had been unavailable that day, and they'd been referred to another clinic for emergency treatment. The clinic we took him to, Sarah continued, was affiliated with Evergreen Animal Hospital. We found records indicating Wells was on rotation there that day. He treated Maverick's paw, James said, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. But that was a single visit months ago. How could he have continued administering drugs? That's where it gets complicated, Sarah replied, turning to another page in the file. According to these notes, that initial treatment included a subcutaneous implant, essentially a slow-release mechanism for the first round of drugs. After that, she hesitated again. After that, what? The timestamps on some of these treatment notes correspond with times you would have been on duty, when Maverick would have been at the K9 facility kennel or in training sessions. The implication struck James like a physical blow. Someone at the K9 unit, someone with access to the police dogs, had been complicit in Wells's scheme. Who? He demanded, the single word laden with fury. We don't know yet, Sarah admitted. The investigation is ongoing, but what matters right now is Maverick. If we're right about this, his condition isn't terminal. It's induced, which means it could potentially be reversed. James looked at his partner, hope and fear warring within him. Maverick had grown progressively weaker over the past months, his once boundless energy and enthusiasm fading until James had made the heartbreaking decision to retire him and eventually, when the pain became too much, to euthanize him. The thought that this suffering had been deliberately inflicted, that it might have been preventable, was almost too much to bear. What do we do? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. How do we help him? I've already contacted Dr. Kelsey at the veterinary school, Sarah said, referring to a forensic veterinary specialist who occasionally consulted on animal cruelty cases. She's waiting for us at her facility. She's prepared to run a complete diagnostic workup and begin whatever treatment is necessary. Right now, it's not even 6 in the morning. She understands the urgency, Sarah replied simply, and the significance. James stroked Maverick's head gently, feeling the familiar contours of his skull, the soft fur behind his ears. His partner looked up at him with unwavering trust, the same trust he'd shown through 8 years of service, through dangerous operations and quiet moments alike. The same trust he'd shown when James had been preparing to end his life to spare him further suffering. We need to go, buddy, he said softly. One more ride together. But this time it's not goodbye. It's a second chance. Maverick's response was immediate, as it had always been when James signaled it was time for work. Despite his weakness, he struggled to his feet, swaying slightly but determined. James moved to support him, but to his surprise, Maverick steadied himself, standing on his own power for the first time in weeks. He knows, Sarah said, wonder in her voice. Somehow he knows this is different. Together they helped Maverick to James's car, the dog moving with more purpose than he had shown in months. James settled him carefully in the back seat, then turned to Sarah. "What about Vasquez? Wells? What happens to them now?" "The investigation is expanding as we speak. Drug charges, animal cruelty, practicing veterinary medicine without proper licensing for the facilities they were using, and that's just the beginning. If Maverick's condition was deliberately induced as part of their pharmaceutical testing, the charges will multiply. And if he recovers, if we can prove what they did to him?" Sarah's expression hardened with professional determination. "Then they'll face the full force of both drug trafficking and animal cruelty statutes. K-9 officers have special protections under the law. What they did to Maverick isn't just cruel, it's a direct attack on law enforcement." The drive to the veterinary school was tense but underscored by a cautious optimism that James had not felt since Maverick's symptoms first appeared. In the back seat, his partner seemed more alert than he had been in weeks, his eyes tracking the familiar sights of the city as they passed. Dr. Kelsey was waiting for them at the staff entrance, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and an air of calm efficiency. She led them directly to an examination room that had already been prepared with various diagnostic equipment. "Officer Connor," she greeted James with a firm handshake. "Detective Bradley has briefed me on the situation. I understand how difficult this must be for you." James nodded, his throat too tight for words as he helped Maverick onto the examination table. The dog sat upright, his posture showing none of the pain-induced hunching that had become normal over the past weeks. "I'll need to perform a thorough examination," Dr. Kelsey explained, her hands already moving gently over Maverick's body, followed by blood work and imaging studies. "Based on the medications listed in the file Detective Bradley shared with me, I have some specific markers I'll be looking for." "How long will it take?" James asked, reluctant to leave Maverick's side even for a moment. "The initial examination, about an hour. The blood work results will take longer, but I've arranged for priority processing. The imaging can be done immediately after the physical exam." She looked up from her examination, her expression softening slightly. "You're welcome to stay with him through all of it." "Thank you," James said simply, his hand finding Maverick's back in a gesture of reassurance. Whether for the dog or himself, he wasn't entirely sure. As Dr. Kelsey continued her examination, James found himself studying Maverick with new eyes. The symptoms he had attributed to cancer, the weight loss, the lethargy, the occasional disorientation, now took on a more sinister significance. Not the natural progression of a terrible disease, but the calculated effects of a deliberate poisoning. "What I don't understand," he said to Sarah, who stood nearby, "is why. Why target Maverick specifically? Why go to such lengths to simulate a terminal illness instead of just eliminating him if he was somehow a threat to their operation?" Sarah's expression was grim. "Based on what we've found so far, it appears to be a combination of factors. Vasquez's operation wasn't just distributing existing drugs, they were developing new compounds, testing various formulations. They needed test subjects. But why a police dog? That seems unnecessarily risky." "That's where it gets interesting," Sarah replied. "Some of Wells's notes suggest they were specifically interested in how their compounds affected working dogs, animals with high physical demands and specialized training. The implications for both their illegal market and potential legitimate pharmaceutical applications were significant. So Maverick was just convenient. The wrong dog at the wrong clinic," Dr. Kelsey interjected, looking up from her examination. "Not necessarily. From a research perspective, a trained police dog represents a unique test subject, highly disciplined, physically superior, with handlers who monitor and document behavior meticulously. If someone were developing compounds that needed to avoid detection by drug-sniffing dogs, what better way to test them than on one of those very dogs. The hours that followed were among the longest of James's life. Dr. Kelsey's examination gave way to a series of tests: blood draws, x-rays, ultrasounds, each one meticulously documented as potential evidence. Maverick endured it all with the stoic patience that had characterized his years of service, his eyes frequently seeking James for reassurance. By mid-morning, the initial results began to come in. Dr. Kelsey invited James and Sarah into her office, her expression carefully neutral as she arranged several charts and images on her desk. "First, the good news," she began. "Maverick does not have cancer. There are no tumors, no evidence of malignancy in any of his organs." James closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. When he opened them again, Dr. Kelsey was studying him with compassion. "The concerning news," she continued, "is that his blood work shows evidence of several synthetic compounds that are consistent with the medications listed in the files you found. Some I recognize as experimental analogs of existing drugs. Others appear to be novel formulations." "Can they be counteracted?" James asked, the only question that mattered to him in that moment. "I believe so," Dr. Kelsey replied cautiously. "Based on the blood tests, I've already started him on a course of treatments designed to flush these compounds from his system. The most concerning aspect is the subcutaneous implant Detective Bradley mentioned." She turned one of the X-ray images toward them, pointing to a small, dark object near Maverick's shoulder blade. "This appears to be a slow-release mechanism, similar to those used in legitimate veterinary applications for hormone regulation or long-term medication delivery. I'll need to surgically remove it to prevent further absorption of whatever compounds it contains." "When can you do that?" James asked. "I've scheduled the procedure for this afternoon. It's relatively minor surgery, but given Maverick's weakened state, we'll want to monitor him closely afterward." "And his prognosis? If we remove this implant and counteract the drugs?" Dr. Kelsey's expression softened slightly. "Dogs are remarkably resilient, Officer Connor. Once the source of the toxicity is removed and the existing compounds are cleared from his system, I expect a significant improvement. How complete that recovery will be, whether he'll return to his previous level of function, is impossible to predict at this stage." It was more hope than James had allowed himself to feel in months. "But he'll live? He's not dying?" "No," Dr. Kelsey confirmed with quiet certainty. "He is not dying." The words seemed to lift a physical weight from James's shoulders. He turned to Sarah, finding his own emotions mirrored in her eyes: relief, anger, determination. "What happens now?" he asked her. "With the investigation? We're digging deeper into the connection between the K9 unit and Wells," Sarah replied. "The search warrants have already yielded significant evidence of their pharmaceutical operation. With what we've discovered about Maverick, the case against them is even stronger." A knock at the office door interrupted them. One of Dr. Kelsey's assistants entered, carrying a tablet. "Doctor, we've identified the compound in the implant," she reported. "It's a novel synthetic opioid derivative, similar to the one in the vial from the clinic, but with modifications that appear designed to mask its presence from standard drug detection protocols." Dr. Kelsey's eyes widened slightly. "They were testing whether drug dogs could detect it?" "That's our theory," Sarah confirmed. "If they could develop an opioid that police dogs couldn't detect, the market value would be enormous." "And Maverick was their test subject," James said, the full picture becoming clearer and more disturbing. "That's why they wanted to euthanize him at the clinic, not just to eliminate a witness, but to cover up what they'd been doing to him." "Precisely," Sarah agreed. "When he alerted to the fentanyl variant in the case, it proved their modified compound wasn't completely undetectable after all, at least not to a dog as well trained as Maverick. They needed to eliminate both of you before that discovery could be reported." The surgery to remove the implant was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. While they waited, Sarah received a call that she took outside Dr. Kelsey's office. When she returned, her expression was grim, but satisfied. "We've identified the leak in the K9 unit," she announced. "Officer Brennan, he's been arrested trying to flee the city." "Brennan," James repeated incredulously. "He's been with the unit for 15 years. And apparently supplementing his income by working with Vasquez's organization for at least 3 of those years," Sarah replied. "His financials show regular payments disguised as gambling winnings. He had access to all the police dogs during training sessions and overnight kenneling." James thought back to the times Maverick had stayed at the unit's kennel facilities when he had overnight shifts or training exercises that didn't involve canine partners. Brennan would have had ample opportunity to administer medications or monitor Maverick's reactions to the implant. "He was there yesterday," James remembered suddenly. "When I came in to tell Captain Reynolds I was taking Maverick to be euthanized, he offered to come with me for support." "Making sure the job got done," Sarah concluded grimly. "If you'd accepted his offer, he might have ensured neither of you left that clinic alive." The surgery itself took less than an hour. Dr. Kelsey emerged from the operating room looking satisfied, a small metal container in her gloved hand. "The implant has been removed successfully," she reported. "It's been secured as evidence, of course, but we took extensive samples for analysis first. Maverick is in recovery now. He's doing well, though he'll be groggy for several hours." "Can I see him?" James asked. "Of course. Follow me." Maverick lay on a padded table in the recovery area, a small shaved patch on his shoulder marked with neat sutures. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and regular. As James approached, one ear twitched slightly, then those familiar brown eyes opened, unfocused at first, but gradually sharpening as they found James. "Hey, partner," James said softly, his hand finding Maverick's head in that familiar gesture of comfort. "You did great. Just rest now." Maverick's tail moved weakly against the table, an acknowledgement that despite the anesthesia, he recognized his handler's voice. Then his eyes drifted closed again, the medication pulling him back into sleep. "He'll need to stay here for at least 48 hours, Dr. Kelsey explained. "We need to monitor his response to the detoxification protocol and ensure there are no complications from the surgery." "I'll stay with him," James said immediately. Dr. Kelsey smiled. "I anticipated that. There's a cot being set up in the recovery room for you." The next 2 days passed in a blur of medical updates, visits from investigators collecting evidence and quiet hours at Maverick's side. By the second morning, the change in the dog was remarkable. His eyes were clearer, his movements more coordinated, and his appetite had returned with a vengeance. "The blood tests show a significant reduction in the toxic compounds," Dr. Kelsey reported, reviewing the latest results. "His liver and kidney function are improving as well. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're seeing the beginning of a substantial recovery." On the 3rd day, Captain Reynolds arrived at the veterinary center, his weathered face showing the strain of recent events. The discovery that one of his senior officers had been compromised had hit the K9 unit hard. "How is he?" Reynolds asked, nodding toward Maverick, who was now able to walk short distances with minimal assistance. "Getting stronger every day," James replied. "Dr. Kelsey thinks he might be able to come home by the end of the week." Reynolds nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "And you? How are you holding up?" "Better now," James admitted, "though I still can't believe we almost—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the memory of how close they'd come to euthanizing Maverick still too raw. "You couldn't have known," Reynolds said firmly. "None of us could. Brennan had everyone fooled." "What happens now with the case?" "Vasquez, Wells, and their associates are facing multiple federal charges. With the evidence from the searches and what was done to Maverick, The prosecutor is confident they'll be putting them away for a very long time. Reynolds hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The department wants to reinstate Maverick to active duty once he's recovered, with honors." James looked at his partner, who was watching them with interest from his bed. "I don't know if that's possible, sir. We don't know yet how complete his recovery will be." "Whatever his capacity," Reynolds replied, "there will be a place for him in the unit. He's earned it several times over." The following week, James finally brought Maverick home. The apartment, which had so recently been prepared for a final farewell, now welcomed a recovering partner. Maverick's strength continued to improve, his personality re-emerging as the toxic compounds left his system. The playful, alert dog James had worked with for 8 years was gradually returning. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 weeks after the night at the clinic, James and Maverick stood at the entrance to the K9 training facility. Maverick wore his official police harness, restored to him in a small ceremony the previous day. He wasn't fully back to his former strength. He might never be, Dr. Kelsey had cautioned, but he was alive, healthy, and eager to work in whatever capacity he could. "Ready, partner?" James asked, looking down at the dog who had faced death twice, once from a manufactured illness and once at the hands of those who had caused it, and survived both. Maverick looked up at him, that familiar intensity in his eyes, and gave a single definitive bark. "Ready." Together, they walked through the doors to begin the next chapter of their partnership, one neither of them had expected to have, but both were determined to make the most of. Behind them, the morning sun cast their shadows long across the pavement, two figures moving in perfect sync, as they had from the beginning.